Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We're big, we're bad, we're back. Actually back. I've been away for 3.5 weeks. I had a very, very long family holiday and it was a lot of fun. Ton of traveling. So thank you ever so much for being patient with the last 3 or 4 FAQ Fridays. They have been sort of a little choppy because I've been taking other content and compounding it. But we're back with another fully packed FAQ Friday. Okay, here we are. It is, wow, it is actually pretty much Friday. Friday for you and pretty much Friday for us because it's the late night before while we're filming. And of course, if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe, go to Produce Like a Pro, sign up for a whole bunch of free goodies. There is actually some multi-tracks that we put up yesterday. You can get these multi-tracks. It's from a wonderful artist called Mr. Jay Clifford. He was a singer in a band called Jump Little Children. And this is a song that I absolutely love called Paralyzed. It's got Dan Rothschild playing bass. He's playing with a pick. He's playing through a flanger. It's freaking awesome. It's cut live in a room, the way records used to be made, cut through my old API console. These are really fat with a PH, fat multi-tracks. Highly recommend them. Download them. There'll be another link. I'm sure the link will be in the email. Download them. They're yours for free. Try out. You can add them to your resume. Just name check Jay Clifford and name check Produce Like a Pro. He's immensely talented. This is definitely worth getting. How do you know if your mix is wide enough or too narrow? Especially if you don't understand how to answer that question for the mix that you are doing after listening to a reference. Are there tools you use to monitor stereo width? I think the only part of your question that maybe goes a little bit against my answer is the fact that yes, reference tracks are the way to go. What happens a lot when mixing in the box, and why I've been advocating using different tools to get away from working only on headphones, why I was advocating the Waves Abbey Road 3. The reason why I liked it was because it created a little bit more like an image, a feeling of sitting in a room. There's been a lot of mixers I know, professional mixers, that have liked it for the same reason. It's not to say that if you mix on headphones, that's a problem. Of course not. Mix on headphones. But one of the problems with headphones is this. Bah! The attack of the music in the ears. I mean, it is just, you don't get the feeling of space that you get when you're mixing through speakers. Why am I on this tangent, you may ask? Well, I'm on this tangent because the more you mix with limiting and compression, the more detailed you get with EQ, the more you build a jigsaw puzzle of sound. So there's just this huge blob of intricate sound locked together in just one loud, massive lumpness hitting you in the head. The width suffers like crazy. It really does, because the thing that gives us the illusion and the feeling of width is ambience around stuff. You know, if everything is immediate and upfront and hitting you in the face, you don't get that feeling of space. What is lovely about listening to a classic mix, and when I say classic mix, I mean Bob Clearmountain. I mean something like Woman in Chains. Go to Spotify now, go to Tidal, go to your chosen playback device and listen to Woman in Chains. And it will do everything for you. It will do left and right and width and depth. Things come forward. The girl vocal comes in sitting above the male lead vocal because it's just a little bit brighter, so it sits a little higher. The left is left, the right is right. Well, for you, the left is left and the right is right. But and depth is there. And it just sounds absolutely huge. Why am I harping on about this again? Because you do need reference tracks. When you are learning to mix and you want to create width, and most importantly, frankly, depth, front to back, you do need to reference tracks. You need to listen to stuff that you know is undeniably brilliant. Stuff that excites you, of course. Stuff that you're trying to emulate, of course. But go and listen to Woman in Chains. There is a reason why everybody I love loves that mix. It's because Bob Clearmountain is freaking fantastic. I think every mixer I admire thinks that he's the best mixer. Not to say there's not other great mixers, but he is considered by most mixers to be the greatest mixer. And listen to that song and your mind will be blown of just how big, fat and wide it is. So unfortunately, to answer your question, I do believe in reference tracks. Now, why would your mix not be so wide? Well, it would be because of all of the things we're just talking about. The fact if you're compressing and limiting and EQing everything so massively, it will just hit you forward and it won't give you the illusion of space. You don't get the front to back. You don't get the left to right. You don't get like, panning a guitar over here and then having its delays and reverbs over there. Then panning another guitar over here and having its delays and reverbs over there. With a pair of headphones on and sitting between a pair of speakers, it creates some extra width. It's a great effect. Highly recommend it. But if the mix becomes so dense that those little subtleties are just lost in this big blob of loudness, your mix will not sound wide. So you did mention using references. I do think that is the secret. I also think taking breaks, because the reality is the longer you mix and the louder you mix, especially when you're on headphones and it's just blasting into your ears, when you're doing that, you will just keep pushing things louder and louder and louder. They will compete against each other. Before you turn the vocal up, so the guitar has to come up louder, and everything else in the 3 to 5K range gets louder and louder. And the result of that is next day, fresh ears, you put on the mix, and it's just this loud, flat mix we're talking about. So frequent breaks will really, really help. But honestly, reference other stuff. Take breaks, use effects that create width. Use things that give you far left and right and front to back. Get depth in your mix and space in your mix. Don't fill every available space with music so that there is no chance to create width or depth. Hopefully that helps. What do you do to help create width and depth? What reference tracks do you love? How do you approach mixing doubled lead vocals? If you were to record a duplicate of the lead chorus part and have both tracks playing simultaneously, wouldn't there be phase issues? Obvious solution would be to pan one take hard left and the other take right. But the sound I'm going for is Alice in Chains, Nirvana, which have their vocals doubled. No, if you're recording two vocals, you will not have phase issues. I mean, you might if that vocalist is singing exactly wave form perfect, but that would be almost utterly and completely impossible. There may be a couple of moments where a note feels like it's just, modulating at the same thing. You might get a singer that does, this big wide vibrato, and then the double is, and you line them up over the top of each other and they sort of cancel out a little bit. But that is very rare. And if that is happening, just nudge one slightly out of time. If you've done two performances or three or four, and those, doubles, triples, and quadruples, those don't need to be necessarily panned hard left and hard right. One of the beauties of a double track is down the middle. I love the sound of a lead vocal with another one underneath down the middle. It sounds freaking awesome. It gives the vocal a thickness, and if you want that Alice in Chains and kind of sound, then don't be afraid. Just sit there and just double and treble and quadruple and just layer those. You can pan them any way you like, but you don't have to pan them left and right to avoid phase issues. You're only going to get phase issues when you use pretty much the same vocal. I know people try to double and then use a Haas effect and slightly delay it. And that can cause a little bit of a rub because low frequencies will cause cancellation. Because even though you may have moved it a few milliseconds, that might be not enough for those low frequencies to get out of the way of each other. So if you are going to use just one vocal and that's all you have access to and you don't have the ability to record a second one, then you can pan them away from each other, delay one, and add a little bit of pitch change. That will help you. You can pitch change it, detune it slightly. That will reduce the likelihood that you'll get cancellation between the two, and it will help the vocal sound wide. Do you recommend having a subwoofer as a component in the studio monitor setup? If so, do you recommend using one all the time or only for specific purposes? It all comes down to the size of your room. If you've got a very small room, you might be using 4 or 5 inch speakers. To me, 6 inch, like the Callies back here, as you know, that I know and use every day, know and love and use. Those are 6 inch monitors. Those are probably about the smallest I get away with without having a subwoofer. But I will say in a room as big as this, it's not massive, but it's definitely bigger than a bedroom. I think I should probably have a subwoofer. But I use them up against speakers that don't have subwoofers but have more low end, extended low end, so I'm able to use them for one purpose alone, and that's to compare. But If you've got 4 5-inch speakers, then probably a subwoofer, a little taste of it underneath would not be a bad thing. But again, it's just how big is your room? I mean, will it stand, you know, a lot of low end? Now, as far as your question, I would say, honestly, a little bit of a sub on some small speakers at all times wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. It will give you a better idea of how the kick drum is sounding, how the low end is sounding, you know, sub, bass sounds, bass guitars, you know, 808s, all of this stuff. You'll get a better feel for it. And it may stop you having to run out to your car all the time to see what your mixes sound like, or maybe you won't have to go as often. So I do think in those situations with smaller speakers, I do think a sub would be useful all of the time. For me, I don't have a sub in this room anymore. It was sitting behind the console for the longest time. I don't think it's there anymore. Is it there, Eric? I just didn't turn it on. Months and months would go and we'd forget to turn on the sub. And the room sounds pretty darn good. We've had it flattened out quite a few occasions. There's some basic treatment done in the walls, in the ceiling. There's some bass traps in the corners. You know, there's some basic stuff done in here. And the room sounds pretty good. And most importantly, I'm used to it and I know how it sounds. So I used to use the sub just to check, just to make sure that, you know, my mix was sounding good on the low end. And then I got used to how a good mix sounded, predominantly from working a lot, and secondly from referencing a lot of songs. And after a while, I forgot to turn it on. And then eventually we got rid of it. But I do think if you're up and coming, an inexpensive sub wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing just to fill out the low end in your room, especially if you've got small drivers. Can you explain and perhaps give a few examples of something that sounds in phase versus out of phase? Not sure I've ever had phase problems, but maybe because I'm not sure what a phase problem sounds like. In phase and out of phase is a really, really complicated thing for people to grasp because it's not the same as polarity. What? He says. It is literally this. If a waveform looks like this, and you reverse the polarity, it will look like this. It is the reverse. That is polarity. That is flipping, what people say, flipping the phase. It is actually reversing the polarity. That is polarity. Now, when people say things are in and out of phase, that's one way of explaining it. But I suppose a better way of explaining it would be to say that the phase is misaligned, meaning you're hearing slightly later or earlier of one or more signals. Let's just say we take my bass guitar, DI, and my bass amp. It's a great way of looking at it because you record DIs and bass amps all the time. The DI tends to hit quicker. The signal will be earlier. The bass amp obviously is affected by the electronics in the bass amp, so it does alter the sound. But essentially, one of the biggest things it does is by the time it's reproduced through the electronics, comes out of a speaker and is then recorded by a microphone, it is later. So what tends to happen? This is an oversimplification, but hopefully it will make sense. If this is a bass DI signal like this, it starts here. The bass amp will start here. It just starts later. That is time alignment of phase. That is an issue where the phase is out. That is not the same as polarity. Polarity would be a reverse, meaning my DI had been duplicated and one of them had been reversed, meaning you would get no sound. They would cancel each other out. Now, the thing with phase is, and where you may or may not have heard it, is it depends on how much of a problem it is and whether you've applied EQ to get around it. Meaning, if I take multiple sets of mics on an instrument, like a kick drum, they are all going to be different time alignments away. One may be inside the kick drum, one may be outside the kick drum, and then one further away from the kick drum. Meaning, if I put all of those three elements together, the low end will turn into absolute mud, the definition will disappear, and it won't quite have the oomph in the low end that we want. Why is that? Because three different sources are all hearing low frequencies slightly out of phase alignment, out of time with each other. So here is, say, 60 hertz on the inside mic. Here is 60 hertz later on the next mic, and here's 60 hertz later on the other mic. So in this area where these three are combining, there's a bit of a cancellation. And it's not pretty. It just gets a little muddy. So you may not have experienced or noticed this because you may have taken one of those microphones and boosted the schnizzle out of 60 hertz and compensated for it. It's not going to be quite as good sounding as if you take one source and boost that and then maybe roll off some of the EQ of the other sources. Or, even better still, phase align, which is what a lot of what I do when you watch some of my videos. You'll see me, I use time adjuster on multiple mics. So I'll take the kick in, the kick out, and the kick out, and make them all line up. So all of the waveforms are in line. And suddenly, boom! Low end on the kick drum is huge, it's back, it's presence. Same thing with the bass guitar. Take 3 elements of the bass guitar, a DI, a mic, and maybe a sub mic on it, and phase align them, so time adjust them so they're all in phase, all absolutely, as near as darn it, all hitting at the same time. Suddenly like that 80 to 100 on that bass comes alive. So that is where you may or may not have noticed phase problems. It's much harder, not impossible, definitely not impossible, much harder to get phase issues in high frequencies. Why is that? It's because high frequencies are like this. They are tiny. They're super, super fast, minuscule little tiny frequencies, not huge wavelengths. So a huge wavelength can cancel out just by moving, can affect the sound just by moving, inches. But high frequencies, not quite as easy to do because they're incredibly small frequencies. So to actually get pure cancellation would be very, very difficult. Now, not to say it can't happen, and I know there's going to be a ton of people down here debating everything I'm saying, but the reality is like that's the basics, the very basic stuff on phase. I would just say your low end is your biggest thing. High passing is your friend, meaning if you've got multiple sources, 2, 3, 4 sources at the same low end, if you high pass 3 of those and find the strongest one for the low end, and like the DI on the bass guitar, you'll get more low end than if you combine all 4 of those, all slightly out of phase with each other. Lots to learn. Probably far more than we can get in this one conversation, but this is a great topic. And please, everybody, just come in here and get in and help each other out. I love it when you do that. Thank you ever so much. I'm so glad to be back here for another Fact Friday. It's been a wonderful, wonderful week to come back here. The Butch Walker interview was incredible. Michael Beinhorn, of course, was amazing. And of course, hats off to the great Roger Joseph Manning. I mean, amazing. What a great week. 3 absolutely incredible people and great topics of discussion. And if you haven't already, please download those multi-tracks. The track is amazing. We'll play a little bit of that track as we go out. You can download the multi-tracks. Some of the best musicians in the world played on this. Travis McNabb, who's Sugarland's drummer, is the drummer on it. Dan Rothschild, look him up. His resume is unbelievable. I played some guitar. David Levita played guitar on it. Zach Ray played keys on it. It is phenomenal. And of course, Jay Clifford is an incredible talent. So download those multi-tracks for free. Link below.